Hello and welcome back to The Current State. We've been gone for a while, but we're back. My name's Drew. As always, I'm joined by this spectacular Qasim Manuel. Qasim,
Yes.
how are you today?
I'm great. It's really good to be back. It's been too long since last episode.
It's been too long.
And it's with great pleasure that our guest for this episode. He's returning, Remy Shannon.
Absolutely is.
How are you doing, man? Good.
Not bad, you?
Yeah, really.
Yeah, just such a solid performance the last time you were on the show. We decided we had to bring you back in for the second. I think that's the first person to make a double appearance, not within like a guest situation. Not like a game show or anything, but he's just coming back.
Yeah, last time he was coming as a host actually to replace me, but now he's his own guest. Now he can be Remy Shannon.
And I have to say, the second best host we've had on the show as well. Take that
behind me.
After Gaza.
Yeah, whatever lets you speak in that.
And it's been a very, very productive week in politics, for sure. That's for sure. This could be one of the biggest episodes in terms of stuff to discuss. Obviously, with everything going on with Iran, USA, Israel, there's too much to talk about. Let's just get into it. So, what was your first reaction when you heard Ayatollah Khamenei and the US strikes?
I mean, it was something. I mean, I'd be lying if I told you it was something that was completely unexpected to me. I mean, there was obviously a number of weeks of build-up. Obviously, 50% of the US naval forces were sent to the region, as were the AWACS, the old Boeing fleet. So they had a lot of men on the ground in the Middle East in the 2 years that preceded the escalation. Yeah, so like I said, it wasn't completely unexpected to me, but obviously waking up to the news that Iran had been struck was an escalation that nobody could have completely predicted the timing of, and yeah, absolutely, really interesting.
Yeah. I think it's crazy how this has escalated so fast. So you've had obviously retaliation from Iran almost immediately, but not just to obviously Israel, to basically the whole Middle East. All the US bases in Kuwait, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all been bombed. This just seems like it's not become just an Iran-Israel thing, but a whole Middle East conflict, right?
Absolutely.
That shows the severity of the issue, and obviously horrible what's going on. So, and also I feel like it's quite interesting to see Trump sticking to his word finally, because obviously he makes a lot of claims that he doesn't stick to.
He does.
But this one obviously he's been talking about taking operation in Iran for a long time if things don't go his way, and he's done that as well. Yeah. I think one of the Iranian people who work in the government who were on call with Trump negotiating about a nuclear energy deal, they said that he was just really rash and really abrupt in his reasoning for why Iran should subject to nuclear subjection to the what's it called, the International Agency of Nuclear Energy.
Yeah.
And they just knew after the call that there would be some kind of military intervention.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of see it coming, like Remy said earlier. Obviously, for weeks before, we kind of saw the build-up of US presence within the area, especially within the capacity of anti-missile or anti-air units, more than anything. But the actual, turning over the events was quite abrupt. And I think that's something you see quite often, especially, I think we kind of saw it in the Russia-Ukraine war. We saw Russian forces building up, but no one actually really expected a full-scale conflict to happen, because we haven't seen that for a while. I think a similar thing happened here to some extent. I'll be honest, I was away this weekend, didn't really pay much attention to the news over that period of time. And I got back on Monday and you open BBC and you see all of this going on. It was quite shocking, to be honest. But yeah, Donald Trump is someone who often, in this situation, I don't think he'll really change his word. We've seen he's given certain win conditions, what he'd see as a good win condition for America to maybe withdraw its presence from the area. And that's within the time frame of 4 weeks or maybe more, which is what we can maybe expect it.
Yeah, what do you guys think about obviously the proposed reasoning for invasion or military strikes, which is because there's the suspicion that Iran has nuclear weapons, obviously, or is trying to build nuclear weapons. I saw something on the news. It was saying Iran has I think something that they're increasing the quality of their uranium, and that is getting close to the kind of quality that you need for a nuclear weapon. But obviously there is no concrete evidence that they have nuclear weapons or that they intend to. I guess you can definitely draw parallels to Iraq in 2003 with the idea that they were said to have mass weapons of destruction. So yeah, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting how it's sort of almost played out in a very similar way to the early origins of the Iraq War. I think with regards to Iran's nuclear development program, they are in the process of developing and refining uranium deep underground. All of the senior officials from the Ayatollah regime who are aware of the sort of the location of the uranium underground have actually been killed, heads chopped off. And it's the nuclear development thing is an interesting sort of it's an interesting angle. But I think ultimately this was in both the best interests of Donald Trump and his regime, as well as in Israel's. And this attack on Iran, you can see the conflicting motivations of both the US and Israel in this situation. I mean, you've got the US who want to be out. Donald Trump has obviously quoted 4 weeks he wants to be in and out. So a couple of attacks, a couple of senior officials dead, a new regime leader in place. But Israel want a failed state. That's my inference of it. That's my sort of interpretation of the situation. Israel want Iran as a failed state in order to, because they're the only opposition who are militarily capable, the only country in the region who are able to provide resistance to Israel's expansionist plans in the region. So the nuclear development thing is, for now, a little bit of a the US aren't interested in sort of the sovereignty of the Iranian people. They aren't interested in regime change. Ultimately, Iran do have a succession plan. So, this guy was 80. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was sort of 87, was on his way out. Anyway, there is a succession plan in place. And with regards to sort of the nuclear development program, that's sort of the narrative that the US are churning out. But ultimately, this is also to curb Iran's resistance to Israel's expansionist plans in the Middle Eastern region.
Yeah, I do think it's like a short-term justification they're using.
Big time.
Yeah, but I think Iran, their senior officials quote that, of course, they do have like a nuclear program to some extent, but the use of the nuclear material is purely peaceful. And
that's what they said.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, we know what kind of impact nuclear power plays for energy development. I think at some stage it was incredibly prevalent within European countries such as France. So maybe Iran were trying to do something along those lines, but of course that's the image that the Iranian government would like to give out, and the real truth, I guess, lies behind all these US intelligence reports, which obviously are not available to the general public at this point. But then, of course, at the same time, they claim something similar with Iraq in the 2000s.
Yeah.
So that's why many people are questioning this and what the real true motivations are, and whether, like you said, it's linked to Israel, and potentially there could be some sort of link there.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely a link to Israel.
Yeah,
but,
of course, yes.
And I want to touch on that more actually, because what you were saying about Iran kind of being the hub of Israel position is 100% true. They fund the Houthis, they fund Hezbollah, and they fund Hamas. So this would be the first step in kind of expanding Israel's dominance in the region. I think they've already taken some strikes against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and I would be very surprised if there wasn't opposition from countries like Syria and maybe even Hamas very soon, because a lot of their funding is going to be paused for a moment, whilst Iran is kind of under attack. You even have like places in the Middle East who are places which are usually like neutral places where negotiations happen, like Qatar, for example, is being bombed.
Yeah.
So that shows like this is definitely like something that's catastrophic to the region at the moment.
Absolutely.
So yeah, and obviously there's also the motivation that Iran has oil. Trump would obviously want Iran.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah.
We can't forget about that.
Extracting their oil for their own refineries. I mean, it's happened in the past.
I think there's quite a big impact as well, because obviously you look at countries such as the UAE being bombed, Qatar, like you said, and you look at the implications for the rest of the world. Obviously, we have a vast number of British nationals who are stuck in these Middle Eastern countries, many of whom migrated there. You know what a good example is? An example is Rio Ferdinand. He lives there right now, and he on his podcast commented about how him and his family had to go on into a basement of sorts and kind of hear the bomb strikes. And for British citizens who live in a fairly prosperous country compared to other parts of the world, the thought of that even is really shocking, and it really makes us question: are we heading closer towards World War III? And this is a point in time where many experts believe that since the end of since the Cuban Missile Crisis, this is the closest we've been to World War III, and it really does beg the question: has the Cold War even ended? And it begs questions like that.
Yeah, 100%. And also, I think another important thing to kind of discuss here is. How should I read this?
So I'll carry on from that, right? And also, another thing I find quite interesting is that it's not just within the Middle East, that the disruption is not within just the Middle East. You know, if you're traveling from places such as Australia and you're trying to get to America or even the UK or Europe, many of those flights, or even like if you go from India as well, just anywhere in the East, many of those flights link through the UAE.
Yes.
So obviously now that that's fully disrupted.
Yeah, Middle Eastern airspace has been completely
closed. And obviously justifiably so, because you have images of people within countries such as Dubai, which are traditionally seen as very peaceful, and you're just seeing these missiles fly over you. It's a bit apocalyptic.
Yeah, it's an interesting point that you raise as well, as someone who lived in the UAE for sort of an extensive period of time. It is disrupting the sort of the image of the sort of the ideal sort of utopia that the UAE would like to admit. So in fact, what they've done is they've started to implement fines on anyone who's taking images of any of the destruction that's taking place. Because what they don't want to do is this could be catastrophic potentially to their image, and then obviously their economy is heavily reliant on tourism. But yeah, Middle Eastern airspace has been completely closed. So obviously all flights in and out of the region or crossing over the region have been entirely disrupted. So anyone that's there is there for the long haul. So yeah, it's having implications all over the world, and commercial jets.
And looking at the longevity of the war as well, I recently saw an article, and it's where JP Morgan are currently advising their clients to buy rather than sell. And usually firms do this when the idea is that the war will not last for a vast period of time. Obviously, when we saw the Russia-Ukraine conflict, many of these firms thought that it would be for the long haul, as it's proven, and advised many of their clients to sell different sorts of shares linked to the conflict as well. So yeah, I think that in that regard, maybe it does look a bit more. Maybe the outlook's a bit better, but obviously this does involve Donald Trump, and he has a reputation for being quite rash and perhaps changing his sway quite quickly as well. And that's something which I think countries across the world, especially in the Middle East, are quite afraid of at this point.
Definitely. What do you guys, remember my earlier point, what do you guys think of what Keir Starmer's done when he's obviously allowing the US to use their bases for military bases?
Yeah.
Obviously, this has kind of come from, I think in Cyprus, one of the UK bases was shot by one of the Iranian missiles, so this is kind of like a retaliation to that. And also, there's been a bit of back and forth between Keir Starmer and Trump, because obviously Keir Starmer's allowed this, but he's also condemning Trump for the invasion and said he wouldn't join them. And then Trump made some comparison of like Keir Starmer to Winston Churchill, saying this is not the UK that we know anymore. And he was like, well, my dad was born in the UK, my mom was born in the UK, so I have a connection to this place. But I feel like over the time it's gone. So what do you make of all this?
I think it's interesting. As soon as foreign actors come into play, that can be something that's of reasonable concern. Obviously, what Drew mentioned. A sort of an escalation as soon as foreign actors start to sort of take sides within the conflict and they start to come into play. That's when real escalation can occur, and I think it speaks less necessarily to a position or a clear stance that UK are taking in the conflict, but actually a sort of a power dynamic that exists between Starmer and the government of the US and the Trump administration, where Keir Starmer is eager to perpetuate that working relationship. It's a fairly minor. In terms of actually the sort of the scale of or rather the what's the term I'm looking for, what's it called, the gesture. It's quite a small one, but it's a symbolic one as well. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I think that also, especially historically over time, the UK has become so closely aligned with America, and obviously that has some benefits. But if you get to the point where countries in Europe rely too heavily on America, you get situations like we're seeing in Greenland, where if this was China making claim to Greenland, we all know what the response by European nations would be. It would be an instant no, and there would be no leeway with it, rather than even simply entertaining any American thoughts around Greenland. But going back to the situation now, I think the mistake Starmer's made here is that obviously the lack of faith within the government at the moment, people kind of expected to see a solid, clear viewpoint from him and a clear stance on where Britain stands. And by changing their opinion so quickly, it's pretty evident that clear stance doesn't exist. There's no strong viewpoint on what the future holds, and that creates more uncertainty. And within times like
and also,
this,
it's given an opportunity for Nigel Farage and Kenny Bain not to kind of attack Keir Starmer, right? So you're seeing on their social media pages, they're like, what is Keir Starmer even saying? Well, what do we...
They've used it as a campaign play, haven't they?
Yeah, exactly. I think you can also see what happened with Spain in the US. So Spain is kind of, Trump said we're going to cut off all ties with Spain, we're not going to trade with them because they've criticised this operation, and also they didn't rise to 5% for their NATO spending as well. So a lot of factors, but you can see, like, if the UK were ever to go that far, that's probably what's going to happen to the UK as well. So you can see kind of that's a precursor to what I guess he's using Spain as a precursor for other European nations. If you don't like agree with what I'm doing, if you don't support me, then we're just going to cut off ties with you. And like Drew said, that European nations that can't afford to happen.
Yeah, no, you're completely right, because Spain's not really part of the big three in terms of economies, or in terms of military within Europe, and I'd say that's Germany, France, and the UK. So he's kind of taking Spain as an example.
I just want to touch on, just before we finish this topic, one more thing, which is obviously, let's focus more, I think, on Israel, because this is not just the US, this is a joint kind of missile strikes, right? This is a country that, I think this is interesting, it's interesting to see that the US and Israel, under Trump, have always been, that relationship has stayed. You know, the US might be backing off on a few European countries, and a few countries in Central America, like North America, Canada and other countries, but Israel is the one country where they've stuck to their alliance. This is very interesting to see. So I think I can only see this as being a win for Israel, and sadly, but it's literally they're getting everything they want. I think, like, as we discussed before, Iran is literally the key to solving all of their problems, with Hamas especially. I think it's important to just recognise this is not just the US, it's also Israel as well, who's joining in this.
Absolutely. I mean, Israel's basically a brainchild of the West, especially following World War II. Obviously, they didn't exist before then, but it was kind of like a land for the Jews in that kind of region. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of conspiracy theories as well about why Donald Trump and why Israel are so closely linked that obviously we don't know enough to comment upon in any sort of way that would be factually relevant, if that makes sense. But it is quite obvious how, despite America obviously feeling, a sort of, they feel like they have to assist Israel due to the nature in which they were founded.
Yeah.
The closeness of this relationship has definitely increased ever since Trump has come to power, which is something that I find quite interesting. And we saw this in Gaza as well, where other countries took a slightly different standpoint, but America always firmly backed Israel.
Alright, and the second and last topic of today is the win for the Green Party in Gordon, Denton, Greater Manchester area. This is more UK politics, of course, but very significant because this is an area where Labour have historically held, I think, over 100 years. And obviously, this is not the first time Labour have lost an area they've held for a long period of time. I think there was a place in Wales which they lost to Reform. This time, however, it was to Hannah Spencer, the Green Party, whose profession is a plumber. And she basically kind of linked the whole campaign to working class and how they have been underrepresented in Gordon and Denton. I think her campaign was quite impressive, actually. When I listened to her speeches and stuff, she definitely seemed to be communicating the right ideas and definitely seemed to be quite popular in the area. What do you guys think of the significance of this and just the whole event?
I think it's significant. I think it's symbolic of a lot of different things. I mean, Hannah Spencer her campaign was fantastic. She spoke from the heart. She's obviously been situated in that Greater Manchester region for throughout her childhood, into her adulthood, and she spoke to the marginalised, and she spoke to the majority. She spoke to the majority of the Gorton and Denton electorate, and it's symbolic of a number of different things. And I think the first thing is that we're becoming an increasingly radicalised electorate, and not because we necessarily sympathise with all of the policies of your Greens almost sort of on the left, and you've got your Reform, your Restore Britons on the right, because coalitions popping up everywhere. People are desperate for change, and even if they don't align themselves entirely with the policies or the sort of manifesto proposals of either one, people are desperate for a sort of a change. And flicking between Conservative, Labour, Conservative, Labour, Conservative is becoming something that's sort of a pattern which people are becoming disillusioned from. So I think Reform and Reform and the Greens, and possibly also the Liberal Democrat in certain areas, are becoming increasingly viable candidates. And it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the local elections in May. It's going to be really interesting to see what the popularity swing towards the more radical parties, Polanski's Greens, and Farage's Reform. And also, I think 29 is going to be a really interesting general election. I'm almost envisaging probably the first hung parliament in years now that we do have 5 extremely viable presidential candidates. And, the voting shares are completely split, and it's going to be a really, really interesting sort of scene over the next 5 years to see sort of what the balance of power is starting to look like in the future.
I think that we're going to see a repeat of 2012 and 2029, is it?
Yeah.
Or when you had the Conservative and Lib Dems coalition. Because obviously during that period of time you saw Labour kind of fall off and they lost a lot of their popularity.
Yeah.
And this period of time around that, the Labour be the Conservatives, obviously within their last long period of time in power, they kind of lost the support of the majority of the population. Another thing I found quite interesting is I think in the past you saw people kind of align themselves either with Labour or the Conservatives, depending on where they politically sat. But now that we've seen the loss of support for those two parties, like if they politically sat left, they're probably more likely to go with the Greens, and then same with Conservatives and Reform as well. But I think there's some caveats with the Greens and the Reforms kind of like policies. There's obviously some some quite positive clauses, but if you look at the Greens one, it's probably a bit too unrealistic. Obviously, there's a clause where he calls for the riddance of the nuclear arsenal of the UK's nuclear arsenal, which in an ideal situation, if everyone gets rid of their nuclear arsenal, obviously people will be better off. But then, if it's just us getting rid of it, how does that look for our security, our personal security in the UK? I'd argue that it doesn't look as good. The outlook's quite bleak in that situation.
And obviously, he also wants to ask Putin, for example, to remove his nuclear weapons. Like, let's be honest, it's probably not.
Yeah.
And also economically, many economists have predicted that if the Green Party single-handedly win the next election, we could see the economy crash to extents that we've not really seen before, with their proposed spending bills, which are incredibly vast and quite a lot. But in this specific by-election, I think it was a clear case of just voter disillusionment. Voters have had enough of the Conservatives, had enough of the Labour Party, and they're looking for any viable alternative. And I think the really interesting thing is that in the last, I'd say, 3 months, the Greens have grown quicker than any other party, including Reform. We saw the Reform Party shoot up in popularity, but now the Greens are coming through with a different sort of approach that really does touch the hearts of many British people who are tired of war and tired of conflicts, and they believe that the conflicts are the reason for their falling the standard of living, which to some extent is true.
I think it's interesting as well, you bring that up and it's absolutely a fair point. There's a lot more competition to Reform on the right, so the right is far more split, and there's far more, not necessarily viable, but alternatives who are increasing in popularity. You've got Rupert Lowe's Restore UK, who was a former Reform minister, and so they're becoming an increasingly viable alternative to Reform for people who don't necessarily sympathise with Farage's politics. You've got, on the right, you've also got potentially the Lib Dems, who are fairly expedient in nature and sort of policy propositions. You've obviously got the Conservatives, who have many strongholds, throughout the country. So the right is a lot more split than the left is. So voters who sympathise with left-wing politics will tend to sort of head one way. Voters who sympathise with further right-wing politics have a multitude of options, a plethora of options, which could split the vote, which could result in almost the Greens coming out on top in May, and potentially in 29 as well, depending on
I do think it's very interesting. I think it's very interesting to see the reason for why Hannah Spencer won this election. I think her kind of grassroots politics, connecting with the working class, is very, very effective. And I think that's been something the Green Party have really used to their benefit. They've kind of looked at the problems of the everyday, and I think that's what the problem is. People feel that they're not really getting represented by what they voted for. But I think with the Green Party, they also get very convinced very easily by their messages. And Reform as well. They just give very, very generic, very, very straightforward kind of campaign titles. For example, we all know Reform is about immigration, right? And we all know the Green Party is about the environment. So these two things are kind of stuck with, although that might be changing a little bit. But historically, but we can connect parties very quickly to campaign messages, which you couldn't really do with Labour and Conservative nowadays. So, with Reform, you know what you're getting when you vote for it. And I think the Green Party, their identity is kind of forming. There's been an identity crisis, I think, with Labour and Conservative over there.
Big time. There's been a massive convergence.
Yeah.
And you're almost unable to pick them apart. And what you're seeing is a pattern of sort of them alternating. but they never actually inflict any real change. Now,
Exactly.
that's not to say that any of the alternatives will. They might. Certain things they probably might retreat on certain positions. Some things might just be campaign promises, rhetoric, if you like. But it's certainly, the tactical vote is becoming more and more prominent, and people know that people are actually beginning to hang their hat on the alternatives. So often the alternatives are spoken in an almost idealistic sense, where they're proposing things that the populace are interested in. But it doesn't feel necessary. It feels almost like a wasted vote, because ultimately they're not going to get the popularity necessary to get any real traction in our democratic system. So that's changed, as we've seen in the Gordon and Denton by-election, because Labour actually came out third, Reform came second.
Yeah.
So the majority vote was split between the vast majority vote was split between the alternatives, and this is the latest 32nd stronghold, 32nd strongest sort of parliamentary constituency. So we're seeing a pattern, we're seeing almost a shift. So not only a radicalised electorate, but now that is starting to translate, and the opinion polls are starting to translate into actual sort of democratic representation. And that's something that I found really interesting about this by-election.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think what we need to kind of see now is whether what we see in the UK kind of translates into the rest of Europe, which has actually already happened in countries such as Italy, and also whether it translates to other by-elections, and obviously the very important election in 29. But I think that's basically it from this topic. I think maybe what Keir Starmer needs to focus on is finding an identity rather than aura farming on TikTok, for example. But great episode. What do you think? It was definitely very interesting topics, good material to work with.
Yeah, it's a big week in politics, let's put it that way. And we'll see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, guys.